What day is it, Mark?
Oh, good question. I was going to go on the Google machine, but I think it's Friday.
It's Friday. You know what that means, Mark?
Rapid Fire Friday.
Boom, boom, boom. Rapid Fire Friday.
Rapid Fire Friday. This next group of questions is from Michelle Tripoli. Thank you for those. The first one, is it okay for pastors to be rich? Not Rich Richardson, just rich in general.
I mean, I don't know how to answer that question. I think the vast majority of pastors, if you get into pastoral ministry, you don't get into it for the money.
Yeah.
And so I would say that the typical rank and file pastor is not rich. I don't
Are you rich?
know. I don't, is it wrong? I mean, I don't is it wrong to live for money as a pastor? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Is it wrong to all those pastors out there that have private jets and stuff? Most of those people are not pastors. They're just personalities. So I don't know how to answer that question broadly, but imagine I had other investments and I, did well in those investments and I had money and I'm rich. Yeah, that'd be okay.
Yeah.
But are you talking, Michelle, about getting wealthy off of the church? Yeah, that would be wrong in my estimation. I mean, although there's all kinds of different nuances to that question. So I would say, is it wrong? Yes or no? It's not wrong, but is it the normal way that pastors live and breathe and have their being to have a lot of money? No,
Yeah.
that's not what ministry is.
Nope. Okay, thanks. Next one. When it says in Ephesians 6:3, parents, don't provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the discipline and admonition of the Lord. Often my discipline is exactly what provokes them to anger. So what is it getting at?
Well, that's a good question. I think it's basically that idea is be consistent in your discipline. And so if you're inconsistent and the kid doesn't know what the standard is, then that's going to provoke them. But if when you draw boundary lines and you are consistent in your discipline, they're not going to say, oh, this discipline is so helpful, thank you so much. No, they're going to respond in anger oftentimes. But what this is talking about is not how they respond in the moment, but it's how they respond over time. And so you want to be consistent with your discipline, kind and gracious with your discipline toward your kids. And over time, that will not gender exasperation or anger. It will be gratefulness, because no discipline seems pleasant at the time, but it's helpful later.
Yeah. Awesome. Next one. Was there no death of any kind before the fall? And you can answer that, and then I'll say the rest.
Okay. That's a teaching that you often get from some of the wonderful folks at Answers in Genesis. And so I would say, and this is a debated topic, and I think it's something that Christians can have differing opinions on. And so what I would say is there was death before the fall because they ate fruit, killed the fruit. They walked around on grass and killed grass. And so I think one of the reasons people say that is because they would speak of Eden being a paradise, and it was. But just think about it this way. Eden was a paradise, but it wasn't perfect. And how do we know that? Because a snake came into the garden. So if we compare and contrast Eden from the new heavens and the new earth, there are no snakes that are coming into the garden.
Yeah.
So in a perfect environment, there would be no snake that would come in to tempt Adam and Eve. So I would hold that there was death of some kind, but the death that's being talked about, that is the focus, there was no human death. And if you look at Romans 5, it talks about death entering in the world. And so the focus really that the Bible speaks clearly about, it's not about animal death, it's not about fruit death, it's not about parasite death, it's not about plant death, it's about human death. And so there was no human death before sin. In the garden, I believe there was death of some kind, but not human death. But that's
Got
also
it.
something.
Yeah,
The
a lot of
scriptures don't
the
speak to.
rest of her follow-ups were based on if there was no death. So like decomposing and
Right.
animals and
Well, we also don't know how long. We don't know how long they existed in that garden,
yeah.
Edenic state. We don't know that. We don't know, like, like, were lions in the garden, and did they have the teeth that they ate, and were they just eating grass? There's all kinds of mysteries there. I mean, that's one of the things we need to realize when we read the account of the creation. It's not a scientific textbook. It doesn't tell us everything we want to know about creation. It's not giving us a step-by-step how-to that God created the world. There's a lot that's not clear. But what is clear is that the Lord created everything. Everything was good. There was no sin. Mankind was set in perfection, or not in perfection. It wasn't perfect. It was a paradise. And mankind turned his back on God collectively and fell, and death and sin entered the world. That's why we have that story.
Got it. Okay. Next one. Walk me through the appropriate process of communion. Is it simply listening and taking the elements, or what should be going on in my head and heart during communion?
Well, communion, we were directed by Jesus to celebrate the Lord's Supper. That's the last thing he told us to do, right? And so communion is the gospel communicated with physical things, right? And so most of the time when we talk about the spiritual things, we live by faith and not by sight. We're not seeing them. Now, the communion elements and baptism, those are physical things. And that's the only physical things we have in the Protestant church that communicate the gospel. And so what it is a reminder that we take the bread, break it. It symbolizes what the Lord has done for us in dying for us, and the blood spilled. Both of those are symbols that communicate the gospel, and we take in the gospel into our mouths, and it enters in our bloodstream, our stomachs and our bloodstreams and all that. And so it's a way in which we remind ourselves that we live and breathe and have our being, and our spiritual vitality is connected to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, what's going on? It should direct our minds to Jesus and gratefulness to what he's done. Now, there's a whole lot of history where people debate the presence of Christ. We're not Catholics, so we don't believe in transubstantiation. I would say that the presence of Christ is, his presence is always with us. And as we gather together and worship, he's with us in a unique way. And so how that works, I'm not sure. I do also know that when we talk about taking the elements, taking them in an unworthy way is taking them when we have something against somebody in our church. If we have something against someone and we're holding a grudge against them, we should not take the elements. We need to go and make it right before we take those elements.
Great answer.
And if we're under church discipline, we should not take them, because that indicates we're not Christians. This is reserved for Christians.
Gotcha. Awesome. She has one more, and it's kind of similar to the one we talked about that Aaron asked. Can you explain our philosophy on baptism? So she means like our church. Some would say that not allowing children to be baptized is in contrast to the verse that talks about not keeping the children from Jesus, Matthew 19:14.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I would say it's not, we don't want to keep the kids from Jesus. We want to point them to Jesus. But when we go to baptize someone, this is the church saying this person is a Christian, and they've lived, their life is a testimony, and it has all kinds of fruit related to that this person's a Christian, right? And so if we baptize someone publicly, and let's say later they fall away, and this is one of the reasons it's dangerous to baptize, say, a 9, a 10, a 12-year-old, right? You can pray a prayer, but praying a prayer does not make anyone a Christian. Trusting in Jesus and being filled by the Spirit, that happens when somebody becomes a Christian. And you can tell if someone's a Christian by the life they lead. Now, the wonderful blessing of having kids being raised in a Christian home is that they're sheltered and they're directed toward Jesus. And oftentimes 8, 9, 10, 12, 14-year-old kids, they want to please their parents. And so they'll say, yeah, I'm a Christian. And then later go off to college and find out, oh, they're not, they fall away or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the reasons we feel like it's wise to wait to baptize them is to give them a chance to be able to taste just to be able to see what the world offers, turn their backs against that, and choose instead to follow Jesus. And that's one of the measurements we use. And so what we don't want to do is baptize an 11-year-old, give them false assurance, and then when they grow up and turn away, we would have to communicate something like, hey, this person's not a Christian. We had said publicly they are, but they're not because they've fallen away. And so I just think we just have to be careful with that. So I'm not keeping anybody from Jesus, I would say. I would say that there's just through the maturing process, it takes a long time for fruit to be shown, and you have to be able to look at a child when they're grown and see who they are as is their faith theirs or is it their parents? And whenever that time frame is, and it hits different for different people, then that's the moment we need to decide, hey, should we as a church say we agree with this person's testimony of faith?
And that's all the questions I have for now.
For now, but there will be another Friday that comes, because you know what, Mark? They come once every 7 days.
Every 7.
Every 7. And so Rapid Fire Friday, we'll be back.
All right. Well, I'm going to hold you to that.
All right. Sounds good.
Take care, guys.